Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the fourth edition of the Access and Awareness webinar series hosted by the Federal Interagency Working Group on Environmental Justice. Today's webinar is entitled Working Together, Lessons Learned from Collaboration for Community Revitalization. I'm Dr. Siobhan Tarver-Whitlock, and I'm a physical scientist with the EPA Region 4 Office of Environmental Justice and Sustainability in Atlanta. I'll be moderating today's webinar. We want to welcome everyone who's participated previously with us, and for those of you joining us for the first time, we want to say welcome. Our goal is to reach as many communities as possible, so please pass along information about this webinar series. The series is a monthly event, and it's held on the second Thursday of each month. We kick things off in August with an overview of the Environmental Justice Interagency Working Group. In addition, we highlighted some innovative projects from various agencies within the IWG. The series aims to provide public access to Interagency Working Group, and increase awareness of federal agency strategies, programs, and holistic community-based solutions to address EJ issues. The series also works to foster a deeper understanding of how federal agencies are collaborating on environmental justice and what resources are available to anyone interested in improving the health, quality of life, and economic opportunities in these overburdened communities. This week we celebrate Veterans Day, a day when we come together to honor and celebrate all Americans who put their lives on the line for our country. Many of us have family and friends who are veterans. Within the federal government, many of our colleagues are veterans. It's truly an honor to work beside these national heroes. At this time, I want to say thank you to all of our veterans. We salute you for your service and celebrate your commitment to our country. For today's webinar, we have quite a bit of information to cover with you guys. I just want to orient you on the setup of our webinar such that you can participate with us. We want you to be interactive as possible. If you look in the left-hand corner of the screen, you'll see the notes pod where we're thanking you for participating. Any additional information that's shared today, whether it be contact information or websites, will be provided there. In addition, we have our poll pod where we have a listing of things that we'll be asking you today. And so we are asking, what can the EJIWG do to bridge the digital gap? We ask that you please type your answers here in this pod. You will be able to provide the answer to those questions for the entire duration of today's webinar series. So if you don't have an answer right now, don't worry, you can share that with us later. Directly underneath the poll pod is a Q&A pod. This is where you will type your questions. Again, as you have questions, as the webinar continues, please feel free to type those questions in, and they will be read aloud after the presentations so that they can be answered. And then finally, at the bottom, we provide resources and materials for today's webinar. Starting off with the presentation is provided along with an MVD fact sheet, giving you some historical background about the North Birmingham community and the work that EPA is doing there. We also have the North Birmingham Community Coalition Action Plan, and we have a listing of resources that are tied to place-based initiatives. So here's the agenda for today's webinar. I'll be providing you with the goals of the webinar in addition to the IWG framework, followed by Joey Baetti, who will be providing you with an overview of the IWG's committees and how we work in community-based initiatives. And then lastly, we really have a great treat for you. We have the North Birmingham Interagency Working Group, specifically the Economic Development Subwork Group, who will provide you with information on the North Birmingham economic development work that's been done centered on community revitalization. So with that, we'll roll right into today's presentation. I'm going to be talking to you today about the framework for collaboration. And just to give you some historical background, the first webinar of this series provided an introduction to the EJIWG, which was established in 1994 under the Executive Order 12898, which is chaired by the Environmental Protection Agency. In 2011, a memorandum of understanding was signed adopting the IWG charter. And the charter is what basically facilitates interagency coordination. It also outlines the duties of the varied committees of the IWG. It was through this work that the framework for collaboration was developed. So the framework for collaboration was developed, after a robust tour of EJ listening sessions. The listening sessions generated numerous public comments that influenced the development of the framework. A draft version of the document was posted publicly for stakeholders and advocates to comment on, and at the end of that public comment period, the EJIWG reviewed and considered all of the comments received to develop the final framework. So the framework does three major things. It outlines goals for the next 3 years that advance federal agency collaboration. It provides a structure for increased coordination. And then it also provides and ensures that communities have meaningful opportunities for participation. The goals help to align agency efforts to improve quality of life and support economic opportunities in overburdened communities. Again, they increase cooperation and coordination, and the framework itself just puts so much more emphasis on the importance of successful community engagement. So here you see the framework goals. There are 4, and this is what the IWG will be focusing on collectively for the 2016-2018 years. 1, the goal is to enhance communication and coordination to improve health and quality of life and economic opportunities in overburdened communities. We're working to enhance multi-agency support of holistic community-based solutions to provide assistance as needed to address these EJ issues. We're advancing interagency strategies to identify and address EJ concerns within our agency programs, policies, and activities, and then also developing partnerships with academic institutions to assist in providing long-term technical assistance to overburdened communities. Today's webinar really focuses on goal number 2, about enhancing multi-agency support of holistic community-based solutions. The strategy itself guides environmental justice collaboration between the 17 federal agencies and the work of the North Birmingham Interagency Working Group, which you'll hear about later in the presentation. The IWG itself identified 5 important areas for the 2016-2018 framework to focus on, those being Native Americans and indigenous people, rural communities, impacts from climate change, impacts from commercial transportation, also referred to as goods movement, and then also the National Environmental Policy Act, known as NEPA. And so with that, we will move right into our first presenter, who will be talking to you again about the Interagency Working Group and regional engagement. Joey Bayetti is currently serves as the co-chair of the Regional Interagency Working Group Committee. He works in the Office of Economic Development at HUD and headquarters. He works in climate resilience and environmental policy, primarily in disaster recovery and climate preparedness. And today he's going to give you a deeper dive into the work that's done within the IWG subcommittees. Joey, you now have the floor.
Thanks, Siobhan. So like Siobhan mentioned, I'm just going to give a brief overview of kind of the structure of the EJIWG and its committees and some of the activities and initiatives that the committees undertake to accomplish the goals laid out in the framework for collaboration. So as you can see here, the EJIWG works through 4 permanent committees and its 5 focus area committees to accomplish those goals. Like Siobhan mentioned, the 5 focus areas for the year 2016 through 2018 are the Native American and indigenous peoples, rural communities, impacts from climate change, impacts from commercial transportation, and the National Environmental Policy Act. So the EJIWG committees are represented by staff from different fields that have subject matter expertise that they bring to each activity, advancing the specific focus areas of the committee. Some of the ways that the EJIWG is working to achieve its goals are through the activities listed here. So for goal 1, it really aims to enhance community outreach to provide greater public access to federal information and resources, and also increase public understanding of publicly available data and mapping tools. So some of the ways the EJIWG works to accomplish this goal is by regularly hosting webinars and also providing trainings on EJ Screen and other federal data tools. For Goal 2, it kind of aims to enhance community capacity building by sharing lessons learned and promising practices while also fostering federal interagency collaboration. And you can see here some of the activities for that goal are community-based technical assistance and job training, information sharing on best practices and lessons learned, cross-cutting activities that break down silos. Moving on, Goal 3 really aims to increase community awareness of federal agency environmental justice strategies and identify opportunities to highlight interagency community solutions. Each of the agencies that is a part of the environmental justice working group comes up with an environmental justice strategy for their agency, and the IWG posts and publicizes these EJ strategies through various stakeholder networks and through the EPA EJ listserv. We also work with interagency place-based initiatives like Making a Visible Difference, Partnership for Sustainable Communities, and Promise Zones to provide an EJ lens to those initiatives. For Goal 4, the goal really tries to improve technical assistance in overburdened communities by leveraging programs and partnerships. One of the ways that the IWG is working to accomplish this goal is through the College Underserved Communities Partnership Program, or CUP. CUP leverages partnerships with universities to provide free technical assistance to communities that give students a chance to gain practical experience in communities free technical assistance and capacity building. This goal also aims to encourage enhanced training from federal agencies to academic institutions, primarily focusing on minority-serving institutions and HBCUs. One of the programs from the IWG is the Educate, Motivate, and Innovate initiative, and other programs like this initiative that make the federal government more accessible for students. Focusing on the regional IWG committee, this committee was formed to address the need for federal government to meet communities where they are and provide more access for communities to the federal government. Really allows local citizens to be more engaged with the federal government and their initiatives because they're already engaging with field staff on a regular basis, and the field staff live and work closer to where these communities are. The EJ IWG Regional Committee is staffed by a group working at the headquarters level and also at the regional level, and each level has a specific purpose. So as you can see here on the field level, it's more, their purpose is more to educate other federal staff on environmental justice issues, provide more targeted technical assistance, bring EJ principles to existing programs. That's a lot of, like we mentioned with some of the federal efforts like Making a Visible Difference and Partnership for Sustainable Communities, working with those initiatives to make sure that they are including EJ principles and concerns. And then on the headquarters level, you have staff that is working as the connectors for the regional staff, coordinating and disseminating resources, and also providing contacts. Similar to the activities, or similar to the purposes of each level, you have activities that are specific for each level. You have the field, which is more about engagement and capacity building on the local level. And then at the headquarters level, you have staff that is primarily focused on identifying resources and providing support for the field staff. So with that, I think it would be good to do a little bit of a case study with the Birmingham group.
Thank you, Joey. At this time, we're going to take the questions that were submitted through the Q&A pod, and I just have one specifically that we've received so far. Are all of the federal agencies represented within the EJIWG, and if not, which ones are?
Yeah, great question. So there are 17 federal agencies that are represented on the EJIWG. Of course, EPA, which is the chair, the Department of Agriculture, Department of Commerce, Defense, Education, Energy, Health and Human Services, Homeland Security, Housing and Urban Development, Interior, Department of Justice, Department of Labor, Transportation, and Veterans Affairs, along with General Services Administration and Small Business Administration. Not all of these 17 agencies will be represented on each subcommittee, but the federal agencies will be represented throughout the subcommittees. Different members and staff from each agency will be working on committees where they have the most interest and most capability.
Thank you, Joey. We also received a question about various acronyms that have been used so far. There was one specifically about MVD, PSC, and PZ. The MVD acronym is Making a Visible Difference. It's one of our community-based efforts for the Environmental Protection Agency, and you're actually going to, the case study that you'll hear about shortly is as an example of that. PSC is the Partnership for Sustainable Communities, which is comprised of several different federal agencies. And then PZ is Promise Zones, and I don't know, Joe, if you want to say a little bit about the Promise Zones, but if not, we can provide a link for that information in the notes pod.
I think we can provide a link so folks can read a little bit more about it, but similar to the other place-based initiatives, Promise Zones is a designation given to certain cities throughout the country to provide targeted technical assistance from the federal government to improve community development.
Okay. Thanks, Joey. We did receive just another question. Do all 10 regions have a regional IWG?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now, our most active regions are Region 4 and Region 2, and we are currently looking for ways to expand so that we can get an EJIWG regional group in every region. We're working on developing resources and best practices so that that would be easier for regional groups to get started.
Thank you, Joey. So with that, we are going to move on to our next set of presenters. Again, I told you earlier, you're in for quite a treat today. We have members of the North Birmingham Interagency Working Group, and more specifically, the Economic Development Subcommittee. I'm going to start off with introducing our speakers, and then we'll move right into the presentation. So our first speaker is Ms. Karima Newman. She's the Land Revitalization and Outreach Coordinator with EPA. She has 17 years of environmental protection experience, investigating, characterizing, and remediating sites with contaminated media, as well as implementing and enforcing corrective action and remedial decisions. Her focus is providing community engagement and outreach to assist local and state officials and communities in land reuse and revitalization of blighted communities. In addition, we have Mr. Brian Holtzclaw. He is also a community engagement coordinator with the EPA Region 4 office. He has over 25 years of experience in federal and state government environmental agencies, as well as manufacturing industry sectors. His current work is focusing on directly engaging EPA partners and communities, especially those citizens that have been directly or indirectly impacted by air, soil, surface water, groundwater, and or sediment contamination. From the City of Birmingham, we have Ms. Amber Marie Courtney. She's lived in Birmingham, Alabama since 2010, and she currently serves as a Special Projects Coordinator and a grant writer for the Department of Community Development in Birmingham. She also serves as Special Assistant to Mayor William A. Bell. And then lastly, we have our community voice, Reverend E.O. Jackson, who is a member of the North Birmingham Community Coalition. He's been a community advocate for many years. He works with the coalition, which seeks to bring together residents, community representatives, and government agencies to address issues of environmental cleanup, enforcement, and community investment. I will want to remind you to type your questions into the Q&A pod, which can be found on the left-hand side of the screen. And with that, we now have Karima Newman from the North Birmingham IWG Economic Development Subwork Group.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me well? I hope you can. Thank you, Siobhan, for that introduction of myself and my other colleagues in the room. I'd like to start our presentation this afternoon speaking about some background about the community and the types of regulatory involvement that have happened or where EPA has been involved the last few years. Our Resource Conservation and Recovery Act program within Region 4 has a permitted facility undergoing corrective action within one of the neighborhoods in North Birmingham in the Harriman Park area. Our RCRA program imposed facility-based cleanup of 16 residential yards and 2 schoolyards during the years of 2011 and 2012. And based on results from those cleanups and sampling activities, it was determined that more involvement in the community needed to occur. And through our Superfund removal activities, we have, as an agency, addressed over 240 residential yards with metals and polynuclear aromatic hydrocarbons, which we use shorthand to refer to as PAHs. And that those removal activities started in 2012 and are still ongoing in the community. Portions of these 3 communities, which include Collegeville, Fairmont, and Harriman Park, and in a later slide we'll actually have a map that shows where all those communities are and how they are connected. Portions of those 3 communities, based on the soil concentrations in those yards, are included in the site proposed on our Superfund National Priorities List. And it was listed on our National Priorities List, which we refer to as the NPL, in October 2014. So like Siobhan already mentioned, the North Birmingham community is considered one of our Making a Visible Difference communities. And later on, when Brian begins to present, he'll talk to you a little bit more of the context of what making a visible difference means to EPA and how we work with communities that have been identified as making a visible difference community or an MVD community. But because we had identified the North Birmingham community as the MVD community, EPA decided to create what we refer to as a regional interagency working group, or a regional IWG on environmental justice, to serve the North Birmingham community in August of 2014. Within the North Birmingham Interagency Working Group, we established 6 subgroups. And those subgroups are really established based on specific conversations and outreach that we had had with the residents of the community, who really voiced to EPA through several listening sessions what were some of the social and economic situations that were ongoing in the community that really needed to be addressed. So it was that, at that time, that EPA Region 4 convened the regional IWG to offer support to navigate the community through the process and gain and leverage federal resources. So we were able to establish several subgroups within that regional IWG after those listening sessions, and we organized ourselves in the following areas: economic development, which is what this subgroup represents, and the economic development subgroup actually became the umbrella for the Brownfields initiative that we're going to talk about this afternoon. We also have an employment and education subgroup, a health and wellness subgroup, housing, infrastructure and parks and recreation, and transportation. There was a question that came up earlier about what federal agencies were represented in the federal IWG, but I just want to mention that specifically for our regional IWG, some of the other federal agencies that we've partnered with over the last couple of years include Housing and Urban Development, Health Resources and Services Administration, which is referred to as HRSA, Department of Justice, Health and Human Services, Department of Labor, and Department of Transportation. I would now like to turn the presentation over to Amber from the City of Birmingham, who will give you more context about the community and the city. Amber.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. As Karima stated, I just want to provide a little context as to how we sort of arrived at this partnership with EPA and some of the things we had sort of going on that led us to this endeavor. So the City of Birmingham is often referred to as the Pittsburgh of the South, and with that, there obviously is a lot of old industrialization and old industrial sites that exist in the City of Birmingham. The City of Birmingham has been through a lot of unique changes over the course of the past 50 or 60 years. About 50 years ago, we began losing population. We lost about 150,000 residents. Over the course of the past 50 years, we're starting to gain some momentum in the Birmingham community. And so with that, we also like to say that while people left the City of Birmingham, they didn't take their houses with them. And so we were left with a lot of blight. We were left with a lot of empty homes and a lot of empty commercial industries as well. And so we have a lot of brownfield sites across the City of Birmingham because Birmingham was an old steel and iron town. So this is sort of how we came to this partnership with EPA, which has been wonderful in helping us to address years of long-term disinvestment and cross-industrialization in residential communities across the city. As the city, we came together to look at how we can contribute some of the resources that we already receive to have larger impact overlaid with what EPA was doing. So the city looked to create a program that would act as a stabilization tool for Birmingham neighborhoods, which could work in conjunction with a multitude of federally funded programs. The city had not received an EPA Brownfield grant since 1997. So this was rather new for us, and so we had to hire some folks to help us sort of get back in the groove and try to create a winning application to receive some EPA funding to begin addressing some of these brownfield sites. We didn't have an active inventory of brownfields within the community, though some brownfields had already been identified. And as we mentioned earlier, there was significant economic disruption within the community due to a loss of industrial jobs, resulting in significant loss of community jobs and tax base. The community is currently situated within close proximity to light and heavy industrial properties, about 34% of total acreage. So some of the positive momentum we built up prior to going for a brownfield assessment grant, we began to, we developed an implementation program for neighborhood stabilization entitled RISE, which stands for Remove Blight, Increase Values, Strengthen Neighborhoods, and Empower Residents. We also went on to adopt the first citywide comprehensive plan in over 50 years, which looked to address green space and also to address some of these brownfield sites. The city established the first land bank authority in a municipality in Alabama in 2014, which helps us to return properties to responsible property owners as well as return them to tax-producing roles. And the city also adopted the 2015 Property Maintenance Code. We had been operating off a code from 1954, so this allowed us to kind of have a little more say in getting some of the property owners to take care of their properties. And then also we began to secure various funding to benefit the North Birmingham community. We obtained funding to rehabilitate Macklin Park and create a pedestrian bridge. And we also fund through CDBG a critical repair program, which allows qualified residents to receive major residential work on siding, HVAC, plumbing, electrical, and things like that. And then we also provide a legal services program called Preserving the Wealth of Our Communities, which allows us to mitigate some of the future blight by establishing a clear line of ownership through a will, which is provided to qualified residents for free. Additionally, some of the other things we did with the support of the EPA, the North Birmingham Community Coalition was formed and prepared the Revitalization Action Plan in 2015. The coalition includes 4 neighborhoods and resource partners. In conjunction with the City of Birmingham, the Regional Planning Commission of Greater Birmingham worked to complete 2 critical documents for the North Birmingham Community Framework Plan, an existing conditions report in 2014 and a final framework plan in 2015.
Thank you, Amber. One other thing I'd like to note is one of the resources that is included with this presentation is the North Birmingham Community Coalition's Revitalization Action Plan. So for anyone on the call who's interested in reading that document that Amber just referred to, it is included and can be downloaded. Brian?
Hello everyone, I'm Brian Holtzclaw. So another piece that was instrumental, as was referred to before, is the fact that North Birmingham was selected by our EPA region, which covers 8 states in the southeast there, as one of 50 national projects and one of 5 southeastern projects, making a visible difference in communities. EPA established this around the beginning of 2014, and it was because of the EPA's commitment to environmentally overburdened, underserved, economically distressed areas where the needs were greatest. We went through a decision process in the region, and North Birmingham, where we already had a presence, we thought would be an ideal partner in its selection as an MVD community. And those are 2 websites on the national level from our Smart Growth program, which get into detail. There is a fact sheet there. So as far as EPA's involvement, as was indicated earlier, the champion for the whole revitalization, redevelopment piece was indeed the subgroup on economic redevelopment. And one of the things we took on was, having been out here for years and years, doing work in the community of different sources, as Karima had indicated, both our Superfund and RCRA programs. We had seen the brownfields, and I personally had seen the brownfields all over the map. However, we thought it would be instrumental as one of our goals as a subgroup to go ahead and catalog them all. And until we did that, it was interesting that, you know, you drive past these all the time, you didn't really get a sense of the magnitude and the vastness of brownfields until we did that. And so get later on where I in particular took a couple community members out, and we spent the good part of almost 2 days in just driving around, taking pictures and cataloging them all. We'll get into that later. Should anyone not know what a brownfields is, and I don't want to assume everyone does on the line, EPA defines it as real property. The expansion, redevelopment, or reuse may be complicated by the presence or even potential presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contamination. Some of the things we think is brownfields that are formerly used, industrial properties, gas stations, etc., may not be a brownfields after all until you really dig into it. And that's the beauty of EPA brownfields grants, is they can really discover if it is truly contaminated or not. So the next thing was done in order to foster the community digging deeper into the whole arena of brownfields was that our program back in Atlanta, we dug around in headquarters and we came up with a program that could help fund a task force. We thought having a local brownfields task force on the ground in North Birmingham would be really key for us to get in the weeds. And so we found some money, and thanks to the Conflict Prevention and Resolution Center, which expertise is itemized there, they helped support us through the hiring of a facilitator to bring all these parties together. So we got a great facilitator. He was third party. EPA off and on worked with him. He actually was a hire at EPA headquarters many, many years earlier, but the region had worked with him. His name was Adam Saslow, and we hired him, and he was just great to work with. In fact, using the people that we were already familiar with from this community coalition, which Amber just mentioned, we recommended about 25 participants, and that facilitator went and called each one of them, and he helped us vet the people. Particularly, he kind of went through conversations to see if they knew something about brownfields. The persons that we recommended were representing a larger interest, and they're the kind of person that were very accountable to their larger interest. And 3, they were committed to the length of the process. We only were going to ask 4 months of their time for their members through the end of the year, so we're starting in like September. So it was a very finite commitment. And in addition to the community coalition, as you see there, we lassoed some developers, the Birmingham Business Alliance, which had at times before had been odds with EPA, but this was a very win-win opportunity to bring everyone under one header. So on the next slide, the facilitator, having worked with EPA and the participants, came up with a charge that largely everyone had really good buy-in. The focus, as you read there, was identifying, inventorying, and prioritizing brownfields properties in the area which had been neglected for years and years and years. And so we were on the verge of not only identifying them but prioritizing them, because if anyone on the phone knows about brownfields grants, the grants are fairly limited dollar amount, and you can't possibly address 100, 200 brownfields. You have to kind of scope them out and prioritize them as far as what the community's revitalization interests are. So at the end, as you see the last paragraph, this task force was going to work with the city, it turns out, to help write the best grant it possibly could. It had not had a grant in some 19 years previous. They tried their darndest, and if you don't already know, about one every, what is it, Karima, 5 Brownfields assessment proposals get funded. So it was well known these are really tough. So anyways, that entity was going to work closely with the city and the grant writer that they were going to get on board. So as far as the next slide, we knew that we couldn't, the task force needed some capacity building. EPA's Brownfield staff from Atlanta came out here on the first key occasion was September of 2015. They held actually 3 workshops. One was to city officials and government types. The evening was community staff. And the next morning was just tips and tricks on writing a very, very high quality Brownfields grant. The city was definitely going to go after an assessment. We had 120 participants for that, and we helped educate the community on the tremendous value of addressing brownfields. For instance, for every dollar EPA grant dollar, there's typically is at least $17.79. Let's round it off to $18 leveraged for every grant dollar that goes out there, as well as Brownfields grants have helped increase residential property values. There's been research out on that between 5 and 13%. And noticeably, when Brownfields properties turn around and get cleaned up, for every $10,000 to $13,000 spent on cleanup, there's at least 1 job created for the community. And there's many more benefits beyond that. And we had a later workshop, just for the record, a Brownfields 201 workshop only 2 months ago. So we continue to follow up to make sure this greater Birmingham community was, had a great capacity to deal with brownfields, where they didn't have it before. So just for the record, we're missing Reverend Jackson, unfortunately. He had a conflict, so I'm going to have to kind of carry his next few slides that were portioned out to him. So going back to the community now, the community had a wonderful involvement and contribution. Thanks to the community coalition that was helped nurtured by EPA several years back, we took some of the long-term community members, as you see in that slide, aside, and as indicated before, we spent almost 2 days driving around, taking pictures, writing down properties, and we actually accounted for at least 76 brownfields in those 4 neighborhoods. They include industrial, retail, gray fields, abandoned gas stations, mechanical shops, even church properties burned down, and vacant schools of note. So when we're going to get to the map there, I can tell you where the majorities were found, but just taking time out, and which EPA sometimes doesn't do, and just take the time to drive around a community and just account for brownfields is really critical, because in the end, when these brownfields proposals get evaluated, EPA is looking for how much, how do you say, how much legwork you've done before submitting the grant. And this definitely showed that the community had risen to the occasion and put skin in the game. And of note, mention the initial survey is on the resource page of this workshop, as well as a more formal brownfields inventory. If you want to refer to that, it's got great information as far as the story of how we just got together with the community and itemized all these brownfields. So in the next couple of pictures shows where the mapping area is pretty large. But as I indicated earlier, you really don't get the whole breadth of brownfields until you spend, that much time with a community member, parking the car, getting out, taking photos, and as you see in the downloaded survey, a lot of pictures were taken. So on the next page, you see the majority were taken and captured in Collegeville and the North Birmingham area. So you see that a lot of dilapidated properties, schools, some that are just beautiful, but they're not, they're vacant. A lot of commercial properties vacated. Again, brownfields, not knowing whether there is much or at all any contamination. These are all cataloged and on the list, of which we'd later address. As indicated on the next slide, a more formal inventory was taken thanks to Michaela Alert of the Greater Birmingham Regional Planning Commission. We actually had a GPS monitor. We retraced the same survey we did with the community folks, and we researched a bit more information. That document also is at this webinar website under resource information. So thanks to those documents, the community work, again, continued to be very active on this Brownfields task force, of which our facilitator helped manage. We actually gave every person the document. We drove around. The tour itself took a lot of turns, let me tell you. And they had a sheet in the car which they made their remarks about all the brownfields that were shown. We had 3 walkie-talkies, I think, in about 3 vans. And we talked about each brownfields, and then they made their notation. So after returning that late afternoon, we broke into groups and start prioritizing based on a site criteria matrix that we all had decided on in advance. Some of the brownfields were nicely congregated along nicely, highly traffic corridors, which could bring, which may be more desirable as far as redevelopment, and some of them were very isolated, which may not be as interesting for a developer. So we can get those site criteria for you. We had a couple meeting minutes, and of which I didn't attach here, but it went into a lot of detail.
Thank you, Brian.
Just to highlight some of the contributions that the city made in order to obtain this grant with the assistance of the EPA. We hired an experienced Brownfields grant writer to assist the city with writing the proposal. As Brian had mentioned, we hadn't had a successful assessment grant application since 1997. So while we were experienced in grant writing, we still needed some assistance in making sure we are in compliance with some of the guidelines for the assessment grant. And then the city worked with over 21 external partners to come to receive 21 letters of support that were eventually attached to the proposal. So in the spring of 2016, EPA announced that Greater Birmingham was awarded 3 Brownfields grants worth over $800,000, which was wonderful news for the city. So the city was awarded a $400,000 EPA Brownfield Assessment Grant to benefit the Making a Visible Difference area of North Birmingham. The City of Tarrant, which is a neighboring city, was awarded a $200,000 cleanup grant, and Lawson State Community College was awarded a $200,000 environmental workforce development and job training grant. And we will be partnering with these other grantees to achieve high level of impact without the greater Birmingham community. And all awardees or consultants participated in either the North Birmingham Brownfield Task Force or in the in-depth Brownfield sponsored workshops. Some of the lessons we learned throughout this process that we're taking with us as we continue to apply for some of these grants in future. Be sure to have all stakeholders accounted for before undergoing the process of site prioritization. You don't want to have people come in at the tail end to try and add additional sites, or to come to find out you didn't include sites that were really important to the community. You want to make sure you establish priorities up front before beginning the application process, which helps the process as well as shapes the application narrative. You want to partner with an experienced firm, at least at first, to assist the city through the process, which was invaluable to completing a successful application and receiving funding for the proposal. And then finally, you want to leverage the assets that you already have and make sure that you're again layering them to achieve the highest impact. And some of the lessons that were learned by the community that we've got notated here from Reverend Jackson were, despite a historic long-term lack of trust developed over many years between the community and the city, the relationship continues to evolve positively one day at a time. Additionally, the community values the strong commitment from the city and Lawson State to submit high-quality Brownfields proposals last December and await tangible results from the new Brownfields grant. The city and EPA's relationship grew considerably when community collaboration was solicited on the initial Brownfields inventory field exercise, the Brownfields Task Force, and the Brownfields prioritization.
And finally, we would like to take some time to highlight the lessons learned by EPA through this process. We realized, as Brian explained, having the facilitator involved in establishing the Brownfields process and the task force was invaluable to the community. The value to the process by providing the field support during the community's initial Brownfield survey was also helpful, as well as, like I stated before, is having this neutral facilitator during the establishing of the task force and the inventory. We also realized that the concerted effort of technical assistance the region offered the community had such a great opportunity for the community, as well as a great added value, and it ended up in something extremely positive as the communities were awarded the grants. So that technical assistance through the facilitator, the task force, and the workshops and training offered this concerted effort. But what we realized ended up being an issue is, for a time perspective, we should have actually started that process a little bit sooner, because we backed up right into the time that the Brownfields guidelines came out that year. So towards the end of the process, we did sort of feel rushed and that we were running out of time. So in the future, we want to make sure that when we're doing a level of concerted technical assistance, that we start sooner in the process. The other thing that has been an invaluable lesson for us is that we are focused on that larger area, the greater Birmingham area, but we've seen by focusing on Birmingham itself, Birmingham is considered a model for the region. And from these workshops that we've had last year and the one that we had this fall, we see the city as being a draw to the other areas outside of Birmingham, and they are participating as well and looking at Birmingham as a model and wanting to do similar things in their community. With that said, we have provided all of our contact information here on this last slide. I myself am listed here. I'm the fourth person listed. I'm Karima Newman. And Brian and I both do community engagement in the region, and focus primarily on land revitalization and community engagement and helping communities with brownfields. So if you have a desire and you have any questions that you want to ask us, please use our contact information. And Amber with the City of Birmingham can also be a resource to you all if you're establishing this in your community. Amber, anything else you'd like to add?
No.
Okay. So we also have listed Reverend Jackson's email address. As we apologize, he was not able to be here this afternoon, but if you have specific questions and you would like to speak to him from a community standpoint, he is also listed here as well. The North Birmingham Environmental Collaboration Project, which is a group of regional employees at Region 4, and it's comprised of all of our media programs within the region who are working in the North Birmingham area. We have a website, and that's also listed here on our slide, where you can get more information about the work that EPA is doing in the community. Amber and Brian and I will be here through the remainder of the presentation to answer any questions that Siobhan feels to us that may have come through during the presentation.
Well, thank you so much, Karima, Brian, Amber, and also in Reverend Jackson's absence. We thank you so much for all the wonderful information that you shared. We do have several questions that have come up through the Q&A pod, and so I'll be reading those shortly. But I did want to give a reminder to everyone about the poll that's listed in the middle left-hand corner of your pod. Again, this is our question on the digital divide. What can the EJIWG do to bridge that digital divide? And we're referring mainly to the connectivity gap among distinct regions and demographics, the economic and social inequity with regard to access, use, and impact of information and communication technologies. So for those of you who have provided responses, we thank you so much. Hopefully the context that I just provided about the digital divide will provide those of you who are kind of wondering what are they asking. You can now answer, because we really want to get your feedback on this particular topic. And so with that, we will roll right into the questions. Again, as I stated before, we have several. Thanking our speakers again for the great information. I'm going to start with one, and I think that, Brian, this question is for you. So you mentioned that there was a group of diverse members that were brought together and organized to develop this Brownfields task force, and it was strategic. They were strategically identified. Can you talk a little bit more about how those members were identified to accomplish this specific task?
Well, EPA got to know a lot of people over the prior 2 years. The EPA Superfund program had nurtured a community coalition. I believe it was under technical assistance grant tool. And during those 2 years, that coalition was afforded several presentations from local revitalization nonprofits, not only in Birmingham, but even Atlanta. There was even some speakers from as developers before. In academia, there's the local University of Birmingham. There was even an air advocacy organization that had been tapped into. So we had already had a good idea of what was the flavor of people who could bring some value added to the task force. So we tapped their shoulders, and as I indicated, the facilitator had a, kind of a mini vetting process, but we were already pretty comfortable with the potential members. And depending on the meetings we had anywhere from 12 to all 25 participate. I hope that answers the question. We did dive into the coalition, which happens to collectively represent all the neighborhood association leaders for those 4 neighborhoods. And as an aside, Birmingham has 99 official neighborhood organizations, and we only tapped into the 4 in our target area, as well as their VPs on their neighborhood association.
Thank you, Brian. And so our next question, I believe, Karima, this may be for you, but feel free, whoever on the team wants to answer it. How are the contaminated areas protected from erosion, and how are neighbors protected during remediation?
Great, thank you, Siobhan. So we actually did some sampling prior to the remediation, where through our removal process, we actually have several phases of the process, where first we conduct sampling on the property to identify whether or not the contaminants are actually on the property and at what depth they're on the property in order to do the excavations. So once we had identified that a specific home or resident had contaminants on their property, they were immediately notified by EPA through a formal process where they received a letter that summarized the results of the soil contaminants that were present in their soil, as well as a copy of those analytical results. And, you know, at that time, based on whether or not contaminants were above a level at which required an action, we instructed the residents on whether or not we had plans to perform an excavation or a removal action at their property based on what those levels were. So we also had a method of prioritization where we prioritized the removal activities and where we addressed those homes that had residents there who fell within most vulnerable, what we considered category. So that was how EPA conducted the removals. And how they continue to conduct the removals is through a prioritization. In terms of erosion or the residents being protected during the excavation, you know, we have contractors through EPA who perform the work, and they have specific field requirements and health and safety requirements that they follow while they're performing those excavations. So we are extremely sensitive to the vulnerable population, to whether or not there are children in the yard, whether or not a resident is growing a vegetable garden in their yards. And we take all of those things under consideration where we're specifically coming up with the plan on how we are going to conduct excavation. So generally speaking, we have those type of plans in place, and we follow them based on what the specifics are per resident. And also during the removal, we do monitor for dust control and things of that nature. So sometimes there's air monitoring going on in the neighborhood. We just do dust control. We provide, we do dust control through distribution of some type of water into the neighborhood or on the property itself. So there are specific things that we follow based on our health and safety plans.
Okay, great. Thank you, Karima. We do have another question. What was the leveraging amount for the Brownfields program?
Well, this is Brian. As far as our leveraging, it was really our internal staff time and travel dollars, etc. We had leveraged this money out of the Conflict Resolution Prevention Center, about $12K, and for that level of effort, the city had later achieved a $400,000 grant The other two applicants in the area who had benefited from the task force as well as our workshops, they also attained 2 grants totaling $400K. So we had a very small, relatively small investment, and the community benefit to the tune of about $800,000. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, this is Amber. Just to add to that, too, Cardno offered their grant writing services as pro bono, since this was the first grant that the city was pursuing after so long. In terms of some of the monies that we also leveraged in the community, that was CDBG funding for some of the land bank activities, critical repair, and the legal services activity.
And Amber, can you define on the phone for what CDBG is?
Sorry, Community Development Block Grant from HUD.
Thank you, and that's a perfect segue into the next question. What was the selection process for the Community Development Block Grant money going to private residences?
We have an application process that begins in November each year. We're actually currently taking applications right now. They have to meet a low income requirement. That's one of the basic qualifications for receiving money for residential rehab and for the volunteer program. There are some other things. They have to have a will and trust established, which again, that's a program we offer. Just because if we're making that investment, we want to make sure that that investment is going to be protected. And so they are required to have a will and or trust in place before they turn in that application.
Thank you, Amber. So our next question is for, I believe it's for Brian, and it says, other than driving around, what research was involved in cataloging the brownfields to identify prior uses of properties?
Well, there are some consulting firms who have access to some databases. We didn't have one on board, so we kind of had to do it old school, unfortunately. We took the research really from driving around the community firsthand and historic knowledge from long-term community members and residents who knew the lay of the land, living there for 40-plus years. In fact, one of the people on the slides, he went and marched with Martin Luther King in the streets of Birmingham. And that's one thing we failed to mention. The community itself has an extremely rich civil rights history, namely Reverend Shuttlesworth's Bethel Baptist Church, his parsonage adjacent. It got bombed a few times during the civil rights era. The population, I think it was on Amber's slide, is particularly elderly in this neighborhood. African American percentages are like plus 90%, and a lot of them live there all their life. So they've seen the industry come and go, and they were definitely a big resource to navigate the streets. I thought I knew all the streets, having been here 6 years, but I really didn't until you get in the car with a resident. But there are databases who can, and I can't off the top of my head remember those are, but we didn't have a subscription, so we did it old school.
I will also add, this is Karima speaking, for properties that have what we consider a petroleum context, either it being a mechanical shop or a former underground storage tank facility or a UST facility, those in most situations, state environmental agencies will have their database that kind of characterizes or categorizes where the UST facilities are, or the orphan UST facilities are in the state. So that can also be a resource to the community, where you can go to your state agency and find out where the underground storage tank facilities are. Other resources you might consider are Sanborn maps, and those can usually be found at the public library, and sometimes, what's that? Right, and as well as the city had some GIS capabilities and help through the Regional Planning Commission that they were able to tap into. But for communities who are looking for help, Sanborn maps from the library or from fire departments, as well as your local environmental agency, can help with that.
And can I add one thing? The State Environmental Agency was a participant on our task force, and they gave a lot of tips as far as the whole Brownfields grant process from their perspective. And so that's really key. Every state usually has a Brownfields coordinator, and they can add a lot of value if you invite them in your community, because they will share a lot of information to help communities as much as they can.
Thank you, Brian and Karima. I have a couple more questions, and this one is for Amber. You mentioned that the city worked with over 21 external partners. Can you give some examples of who those partners were and suggestions on how to move forward with requesting recommendations or letters of support from external agencies or partners?
Sure. Some of the agencies that we worked with, the city has had long-standing partnerships with some of these agencies just by virtue of being the city. So they were agencies such as UAB, which is the local university, the Regional Planning Commission, nonprofit organizations such as the Community Foundation. Also, we had the state agency, ADEM, involved. They were present. Just a lot of local nonprofits and organizations that we had connections with. With regard to requesting a letter of support, really we just sort of email or try and call the head person, the CEO, and just explain to them what the project is, pretty in depth, and have a conversation with them. And if they're in support, they're pretty approachable and willing to provide a letter of commitment and support. I would advise you also to be specific in what the ask is. If you're asking them to be involved in a task force like we were, which involves several meetings, or if you're just asking them for a letter of support of the project that you're pursuing, just be really clear about what that is. Every letter is unique, and that needs to be also emphasized. I like to provide a template for them, for the person that we're requesting the letter from, but just remember to speak to what the organization's qualities are, what their vision is, and again, what you would like them to contribute for this letter of support.
Thank you, Amber. We have another question. How can you overcome challenges to establish meaningful engagement between municipal government and community residents?
Sure. I guess by virtue of being in the community development department, we do a lot of just one-on-one. There's nothing that can be really replaced by having that one-on-one connection and showing up to those neighborhood meetings and being present and also being aware of what the community needs are. It's really about sort of establishing a relationship and establishing that trust. So you really have to be in that community. You really have to be present and make yourself available to any of the questions. And also realize that, there are going to be some questions that are tough, and they're going to be tough on you, but you have to be sort of willing to listen and to try and work with them throughout however long this engagement is, and prior to, and make sure that you're remaining in the community after.
Okay, I think we're down to what looks like our last question. For anyone interested in submitting in additional questions, now's the time. And this is for our Brownfields team, Karima and Brian. Were there residences on the Brownfield sites? You mentioned the PAHs and soil and backyards. Were the residences tested for their indoor air quality as well?
This is Karima. Let me just offer some clarification. For the sites that we performed removal activities through the Superfund program, those residential homes are not considered brownfields. Those were communities that we were actually performing removal activities for because they were designated within the national priorities list. So I wanted to make that designation and also state that brownfields are actually commercial or former industrial properties. So let me just make sure that I make that point. And a couple of other points to make about the contaminants and the migration of the contaminants from wherever they originated into the residential areas. When those removal activities were performed and yards were excavated, a lot of the homes, a fair majority of the homes, showed that the contaminants that were present on those residential properties appears to have been field dirt, where residents, for different reasons, situations that occurred in the community, received field material from industrial facilities and used it in their yards to help with the problems that they had with surface water runoff and drainage problems on their yard. So I wanted to make that point that even though we're talking about surface soil and it being on a person's property, we're talking about what we consider surface soil at EPA. We're talking about contaminants that were present probably from a range of 3 inches to 12 inches underneath the ground. So I just wanted to make that point. The second part of the question was asking about whether or not those residences, whether or not the indoor air quality was tested in those homes. EPA did not conduct residential indoor air quality as a part of that removal. The contaminants were there and they were binded to the soil or either in the soil through field material. So as a rule of thumb, we didn't conduct indoor air studies or indoor air sampling in the homes. Siobhan, I did also want to add to the folks who are on the phone about who have questions about the Brownfields program. You could go to any browser and type in EPA and Brownfields, and it will lead you to our National Brownfields page. And right now we're currently within the competitive grant cycle of our Brownfields program, which closes December 22nd. But for anyone who's really interested in looking at bringing brownfields to their community, our national page is awesome, and there are resources on that page that communities can benefit from if they take a look. And if they're interested in seeing the guidelines itself and seeing what the Brownfields guidelines entail, you can also find that link on our page. So once again, you can Google EPA and then Brownfields.
And I'll give another tip. There's another website, thanks to the state of Mississippi, they FOIA'd or got under Open Records Act all the super well-written Brownfields grant proposals last year, and is posted at their website. If you Google MDEQ, Brownfields, EPA, you'll get the top, I think, 20 grants that were written that were the best quality. And sometimes they're really good to have as a go-by when you're writing your grant application, whether it be assessment grant or cleanup grant. Of course, every grant has to be customized to your community, but in any event, they're good to have as a go-by to see what you should really strive for, because I said earlier, these grants are so competitive. You have to, strive for a 200 perfect score. You need to try to get within, 98% of the perfect score because this grant program is so popular over the country that you really got to be up to the job of making every page count. So I just wanted to plug that link that's actually new this year.
And for anything that we said that you all may forget or can't remember, once again, please feel free to contact myself, Karima Newman, or Brian Holtzclaw as we support the Region 4 Brownfields program out in Atlanta, Georgia. Thank you.
So thank you to all our presenters for today and this great information that you provided, not only about the North Birmingham Environmental Collaboration Project, but then also just in general about, brownfield assessments and how to submit applications and how to work with the community and how the lessons that you learn through these interactions. We want to remind everyone that you can download today's presentation. It is found on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen in the Resources and Materials pod. Again, there we have a PDF of the actual presentation. The information that Brian mentioned about the Brownfields survey, there's a fact sheet about the EPA MVD community, North Birmingham. Also, the North Birmingham Community Coalition Action Plan is there as an example for you all. In addition, there are resources there that are tied to place-based initiatives. And we're trying to provide information, again, access to allow you to access any grants or technical assistance that may be open now or coming open in the next couple of months. And then also make you aware of various community-specific programs within the 17 agencies of the Interagency Working Group. Again, this is information that you may have heard of, but then quite a bit of it is on the website. And if you don't go searching, looking, making a deep dive into these websites, you may not be able to find it. So we're trying to make sure that we provide you with resources so that you can access information to address the needs of your communities. Again, just the last reminder about the poll question in regards to the digital divide. We want to know what the IWG can help, what we can do to bridge that digital divide. Also, if you have ideas or comments or concerns about today's webinar or ideas about future webinars, topics that you want to hear about, please submit that information through the Q&A pod now. It will be open for 5 minutes after the end of this webinar, and we'll be looking at all of that information because we want to make sure that we're sharing useful information with you as we continue in the webinars in the upcoming months. I want to remind everyone about next month's webinar. It's actually been a new topic, and so those of you who have registered previously for what was going to be the wastewater infrastructure webinar, we are now focusing on brownfields to health goals for December, which is a perfect segue from today's presentation and talk about brownfields and the work done in communities. That link and information will be provided later on. For those of you who registered for the previous webinar, you will receive notification in the next few days about registering again for the updated topic. And as you can see, the link has been provided on the slide in today's presentation for next month's webinar. Also, we want you to stay connected to us. If you are already a part of the listserv, kudos to you. If you are not a part of our EJ listserv, please join. It's a great way for you to receive information about what's going on within the federal agency as it relates to EJ as a whole. We do send out information about our EPA-based programs, but we also share information about some of the other programs provided through our federal family. We want you to follow us on Twitter at EPA Justice. And then also we provided a link for the EJIWG webpage, which provides information about the different agencies, the programs that are associated with our group. In addition, the recordings of previous webinars are listed there. So the link to the webinar from last month on children's health is provided on that site, as well as the webinar from September, which focused on how to navigate grants.gov and search for community-based grants. And so finally, we want to end today with, again, saying Happy Veterans Day. Thank you to all of those who are serving our country. We look to continue providing information for communities. We continue to want to reach you and help you meet the needs of your communities. We hope that this webinar has been informative, and we thank you for joining us today.